50 chance. Yeah, let everyone get their stuff here. Yeah, I'm Marty Stadler with Sawyer Exterminating. The three legs of our business tool, y'all may have heard this before, is that we do termite control, termite control, pest control, crawl space moisture control. And Jason asked me today to talk about crawl space moisture. How many folks are newer in this industry? Anyone show of hands? Anyone newer? Okay, back there. Because I know Margaret, Jim, Christy, Joe's already left. I'm sorry, I don't have any new jokes. I'm working with crawl spaces. That's a limited amount of material for that too. But let me tell you why I put this together here. I grew up here. And when I first started doing this work, I thought, what happened to crawl spaces? When I grew up, you open the vents in the spring, close them in the fall, put a little plastic on the ground, you're good to go. What really got me to happening is that homes that I remember being built in the 60s, because they're my friends' homes, I would think, hey, they've been here longer. They've been exposed to more weather. They're probably in terrible shape. And the one that really was a tipping point was right over here on Sunnybrook. I went in there and thought, well, daggum, very little growth at all. Wood moisture is pretty good shape. Overall, crawl space is in really good shape for a house that's almost 60 years old. And 2 blocks over, a house that's was built 30 years later was in terrible shape. And the common denominator I keep seeing was the houses without insulation in the crawl space was so much better. What does insulation have to do with it? And I couldn't get the answer for here. So I went to the miracle of the internet and found it. Now, what I want to talk to today, that is the center of influences are, or center of sources are, Building Science Corporation, a whole bunch of engineers, NC State University, and the EPA. So much more learned places than me here. So we're going to talk about the history of the crawl spaces. It's after lunch, so please just try to stay awake here too. So here is a cross section of a crawl space in 1960, and there was a lot of great things built in 1960s, just saying here too. But if you notice, there's not a lot going on. There's just cross ventilation. But here, the ground temperature is always colder than the interior, and you see the interior of the house is about, 68 to 72 in the winter, 75 in the summertime here. But it's always colder on the ground. So let's dig in a little deeper here. What happens, to that subflooring is, if you look, it's 75 degrees inside the home, and through conduction, that heat is then transferred to the bottom, which is about 67 degrees. Yet the ground, if you look, is around 60 degrees. Old crawl space framing was not only warmer than the ground, but also warmer than ventilation dew point. So what is dew point? This is from Wikipedia, forgive me for reading here. Dew point is the temperature to which air must be cooled to become saturated with water vapor. When further cooled, the airborne water vapor will condense to form liquid water. When air cools to its dew point through contact with a surface that is colder than air, water will condense on the surface. So you think we've got air coming in, especially this time of year, it's over 60 degrees? You betcha. So what would happen is that all that time, this humidity come in, go to the ground, leave all this stuff alone. That changed in the 70s. If you can tell by the color of my hair, I remember some of the 70s. There's a few years up at Appalachian that we'll just won't talk about that. But what happened in the 70s? And those of us remember the 70s, there were some really good things that happened in the 70s, some really ugly things that happened in the 70s, and some bad things. Good things, oh, he's already left, doggone it. Good things to me is the best decade for music ever. I mean, just look at this, all these famous ones. Does everyone know? I mean, I wasn't a big fan then, but that had 792 weeks in the top 100. 1 of 5 Americans had that album, and it was called an album back then. But to me, it's the best one. Although I was going to tell Joe, I saw Darius Rucker a few weeks ago up in Boone. He was phenomenal for that. What was the ugly thing? Men's fashions. Not going to ask for a show of hands, but I will guarantee at least one of us had a leisure suit, and it was yeller. But look, doesn't he look like Kramer from Seinfeld? I mean, so let's hope that never comes back. I mean, I've seen young ladies with bell bottoms. That's okay, but good gosh, a leisure suit was that. What was the bad thing that happened? We had the OPEC oil embargo, and you talk about gas prices going up, and we had odd and even days and gas lines. And for the first time, heating and the whatever cooling of a house, that cost went up greatly. And we put insulation in everything. And insulation is not evil, but what did that do when we put insulation in a crawl space? It's maybe hard to see, but basically, remember inside that house is 75. And it used to be that at the tip of the floor joist is about 67 degrees. It's really now 61 degrees, really close to dew point. And also, fiberglass insulation absorbs water. The other thing that happened in the mid 70s, on days like today, we thank the good Lord for it, is that we have central air conditioning. And you think those ducts are colder than the 90 degrees? And so what happens is all this humidity no longer collects on the ground. It collects on the air conditioning and also in the subflooring insulation. If you go into a vented crawl space on a day like today, those ducts are just ringed with condensation for that too. And so the humidity or crawl space moisture goes high in July, low in January, but every year a little more gets absorbed. And then unfortunately, the insulation gets saturated at some point, and you get a crawl space that looks like this. It's hard to see, but there's actually, you can kind of see, there's standing water in that crawl space, and there's no leaks. It's all from condensation. So I'm going to stop right here. Anyone got any questions so far? Okay. I mean, most people have heard about this, but this is actually in Mebane. So what should, and we talk about wood moisture readings, and if y'all have done WRs, there is certain wood moisture that is conducive condition for termites here. So what NC State says is basically, and this is more talking about the wood decay, the fungal rots here. Fungus will only be active above 30%. Wood with a moisture content of 20% is susceptible to decay. Moisture meter reads below 20%, the wood is unlikely to decay. If you're reading 24%, be careful. Over 25% decay is happening. A vented crawl space in the South this time of year with this heat and humidity, 99.99% of them will be well over 20%, and mostly will be pushing 30%. This is white rot, and this is what happens, unfortunately, to houses if the moisture gets too bad. This is in Haw River. White rot looks like if you took a little cotton ball and just squished it up against the floor joist. There's some body to it. This house is 12 years old, and they had to replace the subflooring in all the front of the house. This is brown rot, and I actually brought some show and tell. You can see this. Sorry, this isn't. That's why it's falling apart. This is brown rot, and you can see the rectangles in the wood, and that's you really have to open up. This is the outside of that joist. This is the inside. You have to open it up to see it, but you can take your fingers and break the joist apart. It's kind of dangerous, obviously, for that. So those are the rots, and we are the pest control industry. Rot, wood destroying fungus is a pest, and we are trained and deal with wood destroying fungus this year. So I got a little quiz here. So we got a house here is 40% wood moisture content, which is over that 20%, obviously. If you look, you see some white bodies starting to form on this joist. It's hard to see, but the insulation actually has condensation on it. And would anyone want to guess how old that house was when we saw this happening? They're basically having the start of white rot. You're right all over it. It was 3 years old. This house is in Alamance County. Beautiful home, custom built home, well built home. And this is another tip for you. Our goal is for you to understand what happened to crawl space, but also things that you don't have to look at the crawl space. You might say there might be some hot, no pun intended, hot spots here as far as crawl space moisture. When they built the house, this house is custom built, and they built a deck on a beautiful deck. It's that Trex material, so there's no wood splinters or anything. This is on the south side of the home, and it was a day like today when I was there. I could not put my hands on the deck. It's that hot. And there are 2 foundation vents underneath that deck. So it's pumping super hot air into a cooler yet humid crawl space. And all that humidity is collecting. And her floor joist right there at the back wall was all starting to have fungal growth and wood rot. And that's a tough conversation to have with someone with a new home saying, we're going there saying, you got to do something to your crawl space. You're going to have to replace joists here within about 2 years. for that. Yes, sir. It would have helped, but not solved. Yeah. It just there's no way the vents when you close them, it's still going to allow some air through there. We enclose their crawl space. Yeah. And quite frankly, a house of this well, people, I think when this house was built, even though this is built in 2015, people knew more about it. That house and truly that neighborhood is a really nice neighborhood. Should have been built with enclosed crawl space. Should have been, but it is more expensive, and some contractors don't. Most custom built homes now that value is doing it with fully enclosed crawl spaces here. We were in a pest control, and our technicians saw, you're like, this ain't good, because again, the you could take your glove finger and squeeze the insulation, and moisture just drip out. So it can happen. Is that my? Is that, sorry. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a good question, Jim. There's not terminology that is defined or quote regulated by the industry. This is my terminology. It's called fully encapsulated, is following the building codes. If you build a house, you have the insulation styrofoam or borofoam, because termites will eat styrofoam. Borofoam, it's infused with a termiticide on the wall. No insulation in the subflooring, and everything sealed. There is ways you can go less. We understand it because in Alamance County, in Guilford County, and Orange County, you can go with a certain area. In Alamance County, anything under $15,000 doesn't include plumbing, electrical. There's no permits required. You do not have to have insulation in your crawl space. I do not have any insulation in my crawl space. Don't miss it a bit. My crawl space is closed, but we call that a conditioned crawl space. But unfortunately, I'll be honest, unfortunately, a lot of inspectors don't understand that. So we are now more pushing toward, quite frankly, I'll be honest with you, it's more expensive to go the full encapsulation for that, because we never want to put our customers in a position that makes it difficult for them to sell their house whenever that may be. So anyway, what should moisture be? Again, if you notice here, this is from building science. Anything over 20% high fungal growth, 14 to 16% is borderline. Here's something here. 16% is recognized as a limit for surface growth. So keep it under 16%. And really, post market or post building, that's done with a dehumidifier. Real quick, engineered joist, very strong, very good. Our experience is they hold moisture more or show more wood moisture content than regular joists. And that can be important, especially if you're doing a VA loan or where they won't close until that wood moisture is over 20%. And we've had a new house, a 1 year old, that they had to sell. Nothing wrong, no degradation, no growth or anything, but they had to put a dehumidifier, close the vents, put a dehumidifier in, because there's no way to get these joists under 20% this time of year except for a dehumidifier. The stack effect is a real thing. Air, as you open doors, when it comes from the basement of the crawl space up and all the way through. So what that's saying is, if you have this picture like fungal growth, this is from the EPA. If you're concerned about indoor air, and my mom had breathing issues most of her adult life, so my dad did build one of the first fully encapsulated crawl spaces in a house over in Elon. But this is what they're saying: seal crawl space and basement perimeter walls prevent outside air infiltration. Not just, you just can't close the vents. You got to seal it up, but you also have to condition that air via dehumidifier, basically. And this is a picture of some work we did. It's been years ago, but you see everything. There's no insulation here. There is insulation on the walls, liner, dehumidifier. My crawl space this morning, even though I was hitting heat and humidity, was about 57% humidity, which is excellent for that. Just don't let it get to this. This gets expensive. Crawl space work is going to be expensive, no matter what, but some get very expensive for that too. So with that, other questions? Yes, yeah. Yeah, I was right up front. We're not mold remediators. There is a protocol for mold remediation. If you heard, Alamance Burlington School Systems had a couple of elementary schools, and Sasser Company's got a really good advertisement. They are mold remediators. That is a protocol, and usually you're dealing with insurance money. Sorry, Matthew, but you don't insurance money. It's after a flood, water burst, a pipe burst, or something like that. That is tens of thousands of dollars. Crawl space moisture control is what most companies do. And that is basically we clean up what is there, we wash off the joist, and then we condition it so that growth will not come back for that too. Uh, I'll get on my high horse just a little bit. Most inspectors aren't mold remediators either. There is, I do this on another presentation. I should have I'll throw this in on this one here too. I had this in an inspection report, something black mold in crawl space. And I went there and looked, and there's little, looks like pepper specks all over the joist. I'm like, okay. There's something called a camel cricket, cave cricket. Ugliest, one of the ugliest insects in the world. They love to jump. They're ugly. I don't know what they're good for, but they like to leave their little residue on the joist. It was not mold of any type. It was from an insect. So just saying. But yeah, fungal growth. If you're concerned of fungus, and I'll say this too, and this is from a company that does indoor air testing, Environmental Solutions Group out of Greensboro. If you want your crawl space tested, they will do it. Be glad to. It ain't cheap. There will be mold there. There's mold out here. If you have mulch around your house, as I do, you're going to have mold. It's just at what level. So don't. If someone wants to do that, don't freak out that there is mold. It's just something at what level there is. It is a natural occurring substance. Just don't want it in your bathroom or in your living room. Any other questions real quick? Yeah, mildew, you can throw that into. And I am not learned enough to know exactly what the difference between mold, mildew, fungal growth is. I use the term fungal growth. That just covers everything. So yes, sir. Liability. That's my opinion now. Yeah. Yeah. And I understand. I don't want to be an inspector. I mean, they do a good ones do are great, but they do have to do. There is liability they have if for someone gets sick, and they can come back and say, you didn't say there was mold or fungal growth or whatever in there. It is liability. The good ones don't try to call what it is. The good ones say, have this checked out, in my opinion. Any questions? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like I said, my mom had breathing issues most of her adult life. I grew up in a basement home on Summers Avenue here in Burlington, which is great to play in, but we know basements in Central North Carolina are musty. So they sold that house, built a house on Green Street in Elon. When my father passed away a couple years ago, the gentleman the couple that bought the house, he had some type of mechanical background. I don't know what he did, but I was there when when they came. I would just say, "Hey, how you doing? Here, I'm going to get away." He didn't go inside. He went to the crawl space door, opened it up, looked inside, and said, "Good Lord, if the inside's as clean as under here, we'll have no problem." They bought the house. So y'all know the big three: the roof, air conditioning, crawl space. You get those things, you're good to go. Any other questions? Oh yes, sir. Oh ma'am, yes, sir. It can. It can. I am not an expert again, but radon is a natural occurring in rocky soil, such as the mountains of North Carolina or granite is the Northeast. Radon is not a major issue here since we're in clay soil basically for that. But radon can, and what do you do? You put a fan that runs out there. Yeah. What the fan does, the fan actually, and we've had to do, well, but you put a pipe, a corrugated pipe, under the vapor barrier, and it's a fan that pulls out, and it pulls out 24/7. That's what you do. So, anything else? 1,600 square feet. I mean, it's still gonna be 10 grand. It's a lot of work. Depending if you see like we did where there's old insulation, old vapor barrier growth, we got to take all that out. And that's what a lot of the cost is, labor. Take all that stuff out, clean up everything, and put everything back. It usually takes, quite frankly, close to a week, depending on the size. It's not, and you're working in, you know, little spaces. In my opinion, what could happen is not like Matthew talked about. If it's not, if you don't have inspection at the sale of the home, if there's any type of discoloration on the joist, they're going to say something. So that's where you have to go in and do wood moisture readings and try to skim. Yep. So, anything else, real quick? Well, we thank you so much. We can help you with anything from WDRs to post inspection. Just let us know. Thank you. All those houses were there across from the church. Okay. Well, if you drive in on Green Street,